Have you ever stopped to think about how a document written with quill pens well over 200 years ago still has the final say on everything from your online privacy to the rules at your local school? It's kind of wild, right? Well, today we are cracking that document open. We're going to trace the U.S. Constitution's incredible journey from its origin as a blueprint for a new nation all the way into the modern courtroom. So, here's what we've got on tap. We're going to start with the basics, the Constitution as the foundation. Then we'll get into how it divides up power, which is super important. We'll also see how this old document can actually change with the times. And then, the fun part, we'll see how it all plays out in the real world, specifically in schools. And we'll wrap up with why it all still matters today. All right, let's dive right in with Section 1, America's Governing Blueprint. Think of the Constitution less like a dusty historical text and more like the ultimate instruction manual for building and running a country. And believe me, this was not just a bunch of rules thrown together. The ideas behind it were absolutely groundbreaking. Even Thomas Jefferson was blown away. He described the Federalist Papers, those essays written to get everyone on board with the Constitution, as the best commentary on the principles of government which was ever written. That tells you just how much brain power went into this thing. And here's the most important thing to get right away. This document is no museum piece. Even though it was drafted way back in 1787, it's basically the active operating system for the entire American government. It's running in the background every single day, shaping our laws and defining our rights. So, how does this blueprint actually work in practice? Well, that brings us to the core design feature, 3 branches, balanced power. You see, the framers were absolutely terrified of tyranny, of one person or group having all the power. Their solution? To slice it up. And here are the 3 big pieces. First, you've got the legislative branch, that's Congress. Their job is to make the laws. Then you have the executive branch, headed by the president. Their job to enforce those laws. And finally, the judicial branch, with the Supreme Court on top. They're like the referees. Their job is to interpret the laws. 3 separate jobs, 3 separate branches. This whole idea has a name, the separation of powers. It was heavily influenced by thinkers like Montesquieu, and the logic is pretty simple, really. If you keep these powers separate, no one part of the government can get strong enough to threaten people's freedom. Now, here's where it gets really clever. It's not just about keeping them separate, it's about forcing them to work together, or more accurately, against each other. This is the famous system of checks and balances. The framers basically designed a permanent power struggle. The president can veto a law from Congress, but Congress can turn around and override that veto. The Supreme Court can strike down a law as unconstitutional, but it's the president who appoints the judges, and the Senate has to approve them. It's a brilliant, messy, and intentional tug of war designed to keep everyone in check. Okay, but what happens when the country changes? When society grows and the original blueprint feels a little outdated? Well, that leads us right into our next section. The framers knew they couldn't predict the future, so they built in a way to renovate the blueprint. But they made this process difficult. I mean, really difficult, and on purpose. First, you need a supermajority, 2/3 of both the House and the Senate, just to propose an amendment. But that's not all. Then you have to get a whopping 3/4 of all the states to agree to ratify it. It is a very high bar to clear. And because that bar is so high, amendments are incredibly rare. Just think about this. Over 2 centuries, thousands of amendments have been proposed. Only 27 have actually made it all the way through. That means every single amendment is a massive deal. Now, the most famous renovations happened almost right away. The first 10 amendments were all passed together back in 1791, and we know them, of course, as the Bill of Rights. And these aren't just abstract ideas. They protect you every single day. The First Amendment? That's your right to say what you think and to worship or not worship as you please. The Fourth? That's what stops the government from just barging into your house without a good reason. The Fifth is what gives you the right to remain silent. These are the core protections of individual liberty. So, let's bring all this history and theory down to earth. Let's connect the blueprint to real life. Our next section, The Court in the Classroom, is all about how these big constitutional ideas play out in a place we all know pretty well: school. And that's the big question, isn't it? How on earth does a document written in the 1700s have any say over what happens in a classroom today? Well, the answer comes from the judicial branch. The Supreme Court acts as the official interpreter. It's their job to look at the Constitution's text and figure out how it applies to modern situations. And when they make a decision, it becomes the law of the land, shaping the rights of every student and teacher. And this is where you can really see the Constitution in action. Every case you see here caused a major shift. Brown v. Board of Education, it declared that separate but equal was a lie, ending legal segregation in public schools and changing the face of the nation. How about Tinker v. Des Moines? That's the one that said students don't shed their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse gate, protecting your right to express yourself. Then you have cases like New Jersey versus TLO, which tried to find the balance between a student's privacy and a school's need to keep order. These rulings aren't just history. They define the reality in schools every single day. So let's wrap this all up. We've seen the blueprint, we've seen the structure, we've seen it in action. That brings us to our final takeaway, the Constitution's living legacy. Why does all of this still matter so much? If you remember one thing, make it this. The Constitution isn't some dusty, rigid rulebook. It's better to think of it as a continuous conversation, a dialogue between the values of the past and the challenges of the present. And every single generation gets to add its voice to that conversation. And that's where we leave things, because this document isn't just about history. It's about the future. And that really brings up the most important question of all, a question for you to think about. As our world keeps changing, with new technologies and new challenges, what new rights will your generation need to stand up for? The conversation, as they say, continues.